The floor is yours, Sharad. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Heather. And good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm Sharad Davis. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO at EcoMap Technologies. We're a Baltimore-based technology company focusing on driving local economic development and building innovative tools to help our customers do that. One of the exciting things that we've gotten the opportunity to do recently is work with Patrick Fisher from the Greater Pittsburgh Arts Council. Patrick Fisher is an innovative leader. His identity and perspective have been shaped by unconventional life experiences, including formative years in DIY venues and the counterculture music scene, couch surfing while traveling abroad, living in a dry cabin in Alaska, and traveling across North America in a van with his three-legged dog, while also paying off student loan debt. Since beginning his career in nonprofit arts in 2016, he has spent nearly a decade breaking down barriers, fostering inclusivity, and empowering communities, championing the arts as a catalyst for connection and transformation. Thanks for joining us, Patrick, as one of our guest speakers.
Happy to be here today. Thank you.
And we also have the privilege of having Carl Blischke here. Carl became the executive director of the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts, now known as Pennsylvania Creative Industries, in 2018. He previously held a variety of senior level public positions and has spent more than 20 years working in this space. Blischke worked in the Florida Governor's Office of Tourism, Trade, and Economic Development, where he was responsible for promoting job creation and community development in the state's rural communities, while directing programs aimed at increasing access to capital for small businesses. Blischke also worked as the Director of Strategic Business Development for the Florida Department of Economic Opportunity, focusing on the state's efforts to diversify its economy and business attraction, expansion, and retention efforts. Prior to his work in Florida, Blischke worked for the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts, directing the agency's Arts in Education and Pennsylvania Partners in the Arts program. Carl, thank you for joining us as well. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Okay, so I'm really excited for this conversation. Today's topic is unlocking the creative economy through dynamic data and ecosystem mapping. I'm going to start with Patrick. Could you briefly describe the council's mission to expand the influence of your sector and how you view your role as an ecosystem builder for Pittsburgh's creative economy?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are what's known as an arts council, and most mid-size or larger cities and some rural areas have arts councils. And the mission and role of the arts council is always defined by the context of the ecosystem in which they operate. Here in Pittsburgh, we have a very, very robust arts ecosystem. It's full of presenting arts organizations, producing arts organizations, art service groups, and additional arts intermediaries. So that frees the Arts Council up to be a little bit narrow in our view, but deep in our work. And as an organization, we work to support individual arts practitioners, folks that work within the arts field, and then organizations who use the arts as part of their primary mission to serve the broader community. We do that first and foremost by being an information hub and sharing out relevant information that impacts our field to the stakeholders of that field. We're also an advocate for our field, and we advocate at the local, state, and federal level to ensure that there's policies in place that are supportive of our ecosystem, while also thinking about some of the advocacy work that we have to do locally to advance our ecosystem and its best practices in and amongst itself. In addition to that, we're also a storyteller for our field, really trying to make sure that we can connect the broader community to the work that's being done within the arts ecosystem and the folks and the organizations that are doing that work. And then finally, we're a community builder within our field. We host convenings so that folks that work within the arts are a strong network and have a relationship with themselves.
Amazing. Thanks, Patrick. And you can really see, like, based on that description, how those kind of four tenets start to weave together. The information sort of informs and helps to build that community, which is how you can get the stories, which is also a part of the advocacy work. So I'm excited to dig in on a lot of that stuff today. And by the way, if you're in the audience and have a question, feel free to drop that in the chat, and we'll try to get to some of those at the end. Um, Carl, I'm curious about the Pennsylvania creative industries. Could you share more about the mission and then also talk a little bit about how you and your team interoperate with and work with Patrick?
Sure. Again, good afternoon, everyone. So the Pennsylvania Creative Industries is a state agency. So we're charged with supporting kind of that ecosystem that Patrick was mentioning statewide in our 67 counties. We do that through our mission, which is to empower and connect and amplify creatives and creative industries for Pennsylvania. And we have a lofty vision, which is aspirational. And that is that, Pennsylvania could be among the leaders among all states in supporting and having a robust creative sector. And we do that primarily now looking at 5 focus or key areas that we'll be investing in. And I'll just go through those very quickly. One is asset development. And here we're really talking about the creative assets that make Pennsylvania great. And that includes individuals, it includes organizations, businesses, institutions, and places. And we need to invest and have a strong ecosystem for all of those. That's what we call asset development. Workforce development, and that is knowledge of creative skills and pathways to do that so that you can be a practitioner or enter the workforce using your creative skills. Community development is a very important area for us. And our final 2 are policy development, which I think dovetails very nicely with the work that the Arts Council in Pittsburgh is doing, plus the project that they'll be talking about today. And finally, visibility. I think there's a real strong need for us to elevate the visibility of all those working in our sector and what they bring in all kinds of ways to benefit their communities. So those are the areas. So we've had a long working relationship with the Greater Pittsburgh Arts Council. As Patrick laid out the key areas of service that they're providing, those are all things that we're interested in supporting and frankly benefiting from the information and the services that they're providing that make a stronger ecosystem. And of course, in particular in this project also, we were very pleased to support it in part to advance the work that will be described today.
Awesome. Thanks, Carl. Before we jump into more of our specific work together, Patrick, I kind of want to set the stage in 2025 a little bit, now heading into 2026. And based on some of the conversations that we're having, particularly with nonprofit leaders, this has been a tough year, right? With federal funding changes. What's the single biggest pressure point that state creative agencies and arts councils are facing right now? And how does that pressure translate into a need for operational efficiency and better leverage for teams? And that's to both Carl and Patrick.
Yeah, I'm happy to kick that off. I think that, the truth is that the ecosystem and the field in which we specifically operate is certainly being impacted in 2025 because we're seeing really unique conditions that I think are rather unprecedented. One is both a large federal disinvestment, which has come by way of canceling grants, essentially hollowing out some of the federal agencies that have provided support to the arts ecosystem, coupled with uniquely also a larger, what I'll describe as a moral intervention, where we're also seeing creative liberties and creative freedoms being threatened in a way that feel very unique, at least for my lifetime. So that those two things coupled are certainly having a really strong impact on our field. But the truth is our field has been in somewhat of a crisis mode for quite some time now. You know, there's a lot of folks that work within our field and organizations that serve our field that hadn't even fully recovered yet from the last crisis, which was 2020 for our field and for the broader community. And one of the reasons we wanted to create some of the tools that we have in partnership with EcoMap Technologies is to maybe not necessarily not focus on these individual moments in time like 2025 and 2020, but actually look at, well, what were the trends over time? And are these situations causation for some of the pains that our field are experiencing? Or are they correlation and they helped accelerate maybe some of the pains that our field was experiencing? You know, for an arts council, I think one of the challenges is always if you're not a programmatic organization that is producing and presenting work, your work can sometimes be hard to get the broader community to understand and therefore support, especially when you're in an ecosystem that has as many robust organizations and dynamic organizations as Pittsburgh does in particular. There's always this assumption that you're going after the same funders to support the work, right? So this assumption that the pie is fixed and the slices just keep getting smaller versus the pie actually growing in size. And I think as a result of that, another challenge that our field has been facing in particular are growing expectations to do more, but with less. And that certainly has been a challenge that we've experienced here in Pittsburgh, across the Commonwealth, but I think it's something that's shared with many arts organizations across the nation.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick, for that insight. Carl, what are you seeing as the single biggest pressure point facing state creative agencies right now?
Yeah, this is difficult because there's more than one pressure point. But I will follow directions and point out a single pressure point, even though there are more.
You can talk about some of the key ones, Carl, please. I think that will help.
You know, I think recently one of the things that our sector is dealing with, but we're not alone in this, is changes in cost structure for continuing to operate and produce, you know, and engage with audiences. And that I think has been difficult. It's put pressure on organizations to be able to attract and retain their workforce, to keep up with a desire to do production of various kinds and services that are costing more. And that I think has put a lot of pressure on organizations, in addition to other things, which also include, you know, things that we're not fully over yet or solved for, changes in audience behavior and expectations, et cetera. But certainly costs are among, you know, the biggest things that I hear when I've been talking to individual organizations.
Yeah. I think that context nicely weaves in, Patrick, with your investments that you've made into new technology. Why do you think now was the right time to invest in new infrastructure? I'm thinking digital infrastructure. And what was the case you made internally about why technology was essential to addressing or helping to address some of these macro pressure points that we talked about?
Yeah, great question. And, you know, part of that comes back to that idea of doing more with less. We have a very small team at the Greater Pittsburgh Arts Tech Council. We're 6 folks. And we, as I mentioned, have a incredibly robust arts ecosystem, not just here in Pittsburgh, but throughout Allegheny County and the Collier counties as well. And there is a high demand for our work. We, are often on the front lines of helping individuals and organizations either navigate a crisis or an opportunity. And it's sometimes difficult to meet that demand when you can't replicate your staff. And so one of the ways that we saw we could scale our work was through investments in technology. Really thinking about a lot of the frequently asked questions that we receive and how can we streamline access to the answers to those questions so that we have tools capable of maybe freeing up some of our staff capacity to focus on larger strategic issues versus just kind of the answering of the same questions over and over again. Similarly, what you touched upon earlier in the introductions and the first question is a lot of this work feeds together, right? And you need to have data points and other things to help tell the story, to help uplift both the strengths and the vulnerabilities of an ecosystem, and then advocate for that ecosystem.
Yeah. And Carl, why was this project, the development of what we hope is a replicable model, worth state level grant funding, and why fund this work now?
Yeah, so we're, as an agency, very interested in the projects that come up, from those across Pennsylvania that can make a difference in their community, but also can be replicated or provide insights to other communities. We call that in the office our kind of catalyst project. So this is one that Patrick reached out to us about, and his rationale, which he kind of outlined just now, to be able to use investments in technology to essentially provide more information in a more digestible way, in a more powerful way, but also using that technology to make sure it's not too costly for either the Arts Council or those that would put information into it or access it for their own use was very compelling. So that's why we were very pleased to provide what we call a catalyst grant for this, and a big rationale for us. And one of the reasons why we were excited to watch it go forward and to see what it could mean too for other communities. And in part, Patrick was referencing a very robust creative sector in his region, which is true, especially for the size of that market. But it's really important to know your numbers, whether it's from your own personal health perspective, right? They always say know your numbers, but we need to know our numbers about our own sector. And I think over time, that's going to do the things that you would expect any other important sector to know. And it's important because, one, what's happening? Who's involved? Are there trends that we can look at from a more longitudinal look? Are there weaknesses that we should be addressing through policy? And I think you're much more able to do that if you have a robust system, an accessible system that are giving you your numbers, just like you might want to track your cholesterol, over the years, or other factors and indicators of your overall health. We need to absolutely do the same for our creative sector.
To build upon that response too, and thank you for mentioning that, Carl. Our field has done work historically to track some of these things, but traditionally those have been every 2 years, every 4 years, right there. They require a capacity to be able to do that type of research, and there's typically a pretty heavy labor lift and cost associated with those things. But what we've seen since 2020 and 2025 is a lot can change in 2 years or 4 years. And we actually need more timely data at our disposal and something that is showing trends over time so we can get off our heels and onto our toes as it relates to, identifying priorities, doing strategic planning, thinking about contingency planning, but also thinking about the life cycle of organizations as well as transitions within those organizations, and maybe what priorities should be present when you're thinking about recruiting new leadership, et cetera.
I think that those are all incredible points. One of the things that we are aiming to do at EcoMap is start to drill down on really specific ecosystem level data. I think the nonprofit health dashboard does a good job of that, right? Like being able to have visibility into a specific organization and then zoom out and look at the entire ecosystem. We're actually working on some new innovations as well that sort of start to score and analyze sectors at a geographic level as well. And so excited to keep leveraging and bringing technology to bear to answer some of these really meaty but important questions. And so you may see that theme kind of spread throughout the rest of this conversation. So I just wanted to flag it. Drilling down a little bit more specifically, Patrick, when you're talking to peers, what's the most common failure point that they raise? You mentioned to me in a conversation, speaking of high effort, sort of this perpetual challenge with this idea of a comprehensive events calendar, just as an example. Why do those projects seem to peter out historically? And how does your new approach with the Pittsburgh Arts and Culture Hub help to try to avoid that fate?
Well, I think that in the early days of it, I think that the aspirations just outpaced the technology. This is the third arts council that I've worked for, and every single one I've worked for, and they're all different markets, have all attempted to have a comprehensive calendar. And the technology just really wasn't in place yet to do that in a way that was economical and efficient. And the reason why those other initiatives in the past have, I think, faltered or failed is because just staff capacity, right? When you were attempting to do some of these things in the past, it would either have to be something that was input by a staff member of the organizing organization, so in this case, the Greater Pittsburgh Arts Council, or it would need to be input by the user into the system, right? And that was timely. And when you're thinking about something like a comprehensive calendar in particular, a lot of organizations have marketing fatigue. They're maybe having to go and upload their events to 10 different sites. And there's not good analytic data to say, well, what is actually leading people to attend your event or go to your organization, right? So questioning, is there an ROI for all of that labor? Similarly, with what we're doing through Art Pulse in particular, recognizing that there's also reporting fatigue, especially in the last 5 years because of first the pandemic and then what we're seeing at the federal level right now. Nonprofit organizations are asked to complete a lot of surveys and reports to share the impact of things on their work or their service or their health or any number of things, in addition to all of the reports they have to do for their funders, right? And in smaller and mid-sized groups, they might not have an on-staff grant writer or a development person, and that might fall onto the executive director or somebody in the communications department, right? And it all comes back to internal staff capacity. So really what started our conversation with EcoMaps was a real strong desire to say, well, what is capable based off of where technology is at right now, and how can that be replicable? I think besides trying to create an information hub and the health dashboard that we've worked to do, I think the biggest thing we were trying to solve is, and how do we not tax people's capacity in the process? Part of that, though, does require us as the Greater Pittsburgh Arts Council being willing to tap our own capacity for hopefully not a prolonged period of time, recognizing that we are moving into a territory that is new and that hasn't been proven necessarily within our field, right? And so that we as an organization in the position that we are, have to be willing to leverage some of our internal capacity to develop new tools, to do some of the trial and error testing, to iterate over time, in order to develop something that would ultimately save other folks time on the back end.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And beyond events, we know that accurate asset mapping is crucial. Carl called it, I think, asset development to a certain degree. You recently noted to me that organizations, particularly in this sector, can be nomadic to a certain degree, with administrative offices kind of separate from program locations. And going into the details a little bit, but how does your new platform handle that level of complexity, mapping service locations, not just mailing addresses? And what insights does that spatial data unlock for you?
Yeah, so we're not quite there yet with PGH Art Hub, because when we started into this work with EcoMaps, we knew we wanted to create something that was a comprehensive resource for both organizations and those that work within the field. Where we saw the biggest gap in the present moment is for artists and folks that work within the field. So that's really where we prioritized a lot of our data points within PGH Art Hub. And when we're looking at what we mapped out through PGH Art Hub, we're looking at like direct services that artists can take advantage of, whether that's framing services, printing services, appraisal services, as well as space-based resources that artists can take advantage of, such as artist studio spaces, stage rentals, co-working spaces. Those types of things tend to have very fixed physical addresses, right? A framing service is probably happening in the location where the business is getting their mail. The stage that you can rent or the studio that you can rent is probably also located in the place where you can get the mail. Where it gets a lot more complicated is on the organizational side for presenting arts groups, right? Someone like the Pittsburgh Ballet Theater Company, they likely have a different administrative office or a location where they do their classes than where they actually do their presentations. And their presentation of work might also occur in different community locations, right? So where it would be a challenge is if the data that was being pulled for the comprehensive calendar in particular was utilizing the mailing address or the administrative address of the organization versus the location where it's occurred. But one of the things that we are aspiring to do is recognizing that organizations do tend to be nomadic, actually map out what are the rentable venues and spaces within our arts ecosystem so that when somebody like the River City Brass Band needs to do a performance, they don't have to, again, invest a ton of staff time into trying to track down all the 300-person capacity spaces that could potentially host their performances. Again, we recognize that our compiling on the front end and integrating them into a new technology is a commitment of our own capacity, but ultimately it's in service to the stakeholders within our field so that hopefully we free up some of their staff capacity in the end.
Yeah. And Carl, what's coming up for you? Like, do these challenges resonate with a state level agency as well?
For us, just going back to this idea of where things happen, other than like the business operations, that to me is a very salient point. And we know that when you have an area or a space or a location where performances or other things are happening, that makes a big difference to that geography.
Mhm.
That's what's really important. And for us, we are really interested in the ability, in a way, again, that takes into account cost and capacity, to have these asset maps that include not only the organizations, but the places and the way that people are using those places. And my hope, I will say again, is that this facilitates not only awareness of the organizations that are doing this work and potential audiences for them, but local governments as well, right? To think about what are our creative assets and people and places, and how do we plan from our own local comprehensive planning standpoint around planning and resources that support that. And for me, that is the great opportunity for Pennsylvania, is to connect all those things, the place, the assets, and in a way, the governing structure of a local government, so that they can think about, do we want to have creative districts? Do we want to have policy in our comprehensive plan that identifies these things that are worthy of resources that we're going to go after, either from the state or federal level? How are we planning around keeping, maintaining, growing, supporting essentially our creative assets? I think that's where a big opportunity and a big interest for us as an agency, that's where our interests lie.
Interesting. Patrick, let's shift to the Art Pulse a little bit. You're piloting this. It uses 990 data. That data can sometimes be a year or two old. Can you walk us through an example that provides why only looking at a single year's snapshot is dangerous? You alluded to some of this already. And why seeing the Art Pulse provided long-term trends, in your opinion, is essential for funders and policymakers.
Yeah, a lot can change in a year, as we've seen in two circumstances over the last 5 years alone. You know, no method of tracking and reporting is going to be perfect, right? But my opinion is that you should not be allowing perfection to be the enemy of progress. And while there are shortcomings to 990s, as you mentioned, Sherrod, you know, they don't all get filed at the same exact time based off of when organizations have their fiscal years, when they go through their auditing process, when they're approved by the board and finalized by their auditors, right? And also the ways financials are broken down on a 990 might be slightly different than the way they're broken down on an internal financial report that an organization tracks, right? But at least it creates an opportunity for us to standardize the data that we're working with as a field and across time. And so for us, it was really important to say, okay, there's not a perfect method that we can use unless we're asking literally every arts organization to provide us with their monthly reconciled financial statements, which again wouldn't likely happen. And two, would be a huge labor expectation on both those organizations and ours. Let's do the best we can with what we have available through public source, which are the 990s. And while there is some information lacking from a 990, for instance, contributed revenue and grant revenue are combined together on a 990, when in most nonprofit organizations, you're looking at those things separately, right? And while it's not perfect, it at least gives us a standardized starting. And that has been standardized over a period of time. So for us on this dashboard, we can actually take a look at from 2010 till 2025, the trends financially that have been occurring within our field. And that was all collected using public information sources by way of the 990s. Again, some of the challenges, if you're a smaller organization, you might file an addended version of a 990 and not the full version. And again, that might provide even less data. But ultimately, there's strong enough data to still be able to show trends over time. And I think that that's something that our sector has really lacked for a while now, is that annual analysis year over year to be able to look at where are we improving, where are we maintaining, and where are we declining, and are those creating short-term or long-term impacts on our field? And how do we use that to then have truly informed conversations with the folks that are invested in our field or should be invested in? In addition to that, it's allowing us to say, we recognize that not everybody in our field is an orange, right? And we shouldn't be comparing an apple to an orange based off of the budget size. So being able to work with EcoMap Technologies to actually say, okay, what are the budget tiers that we should be looking at? And how do we review things within those tiers so that we're not assuming that the conditions and trends of organizations with budgets under 100,000 are the same as organizations with budgets over 500, right? And we really want to be able to compartmentalize some of that while still having a sector-wide analysis and conversation. The other strength that I think is present through ArtPulse is that because we're using public information sources in 990s to pull the data into ArtPulse, we not only have that sector level view, but on the back end and protected, we also can provide individual organizations with their personalized dashboard that specifically looks at their organization and compares it against a benchmark within their budget tier. And I think that that's wildly helpful for any organization to have access to. And I use myself as an example. You know, when I joined the Greater Pittsburgh Arts Council, there's a lot of information I wish I would have known on the front end versus the due diligence once you're actually in the role. Because you kind of got to know those things so you can prioritize what's the work that needs to be done most critically and most urgently right now. And in addition to that, if you have an analysis of some of these trends as it relates to the organizational level, when an organization is going through transition and they're maybe recruiting for new leadership or maybe even board members, they can take a look at, well, what are our greatest either opportunities or vulnerabilities? And how do we recruit with those in line? So we make sure that the skill sets of any candidates actually align with our most pressing needs based off of the trends that we're seeing.
Yep. Yeah. Really helpful explanation of thinking through that, Patrick. I only have a few more questions, so I'm just reminding the audience to drop questions in the chat or Q&A if you have them. Patrick, you and I have discussed this concept of the 80% mindset. You know, we're trying a lot of new things together. We're trying to push the envelope on how technology can be used for this sector and other sectors. When implementing a platform like this, sometimes there can be a tension between, perfection and progress, as you said, 100% perfection versus embracing a pilot and iterate model. What advice do you have for other leaders to get them more comfortable with this 80% successful rollout, this concept of progress, not just perfection, in order to move faster on new innovations?
Yeah, I mean, I think one is asking yourself, are you in a position to be able to take risks, right? Because not all organizations might be in that role or that position. But I think that as long as you're transparent with where you're at in the process, And that means being clear with everybody that this is a work in progress. This is iterative. This is something that we are not expecting to be perfect. And we invite you to poke holes in it and provide feedback so we can improve it over time, right? I think that if you're in a position to take risks and you can be transparent with your stakeholders across the field about this is something that is iterative right now, and we see it as a tool that is better than no tool, but we certainly don't see it as a perfect tool yet, and invite the community to play an active role in shaping it further, then I think that you're in a good position. And I think that that's also one of the things that really attracted us to working with EcoMap Technologies in particular, is you and your team showed a real willingness to be a partner in this process, right? We were also asking you all to take a risk because you have this sandbox that you've been playing in for a while. And here we come to you saying, we think there's some transferable aspects to this and the sandbox that we work in. Do you want to maybe send some folks from your team over into this sandbox to play with us, right? And finding a partner that's willing to not only just take what they have as an existing business model and really hear what you're aspiring to do and being receptive to the feedback that you provide along the way to further shape not only what they're doing for you, but also as it relates to potentially their business model as a whole, is also equally important. I think that if you're trying to take risks and innovate, but you have an extremely rigid partner, it's going to be really hard to do because you might be trying to take a square peg and put it in a round hole. So making sure that you have the right partner along the way and that you're communicative, that you're spelling out both of your expectations when tension or conflict arises, that you're leaning into, conversations that help resolve those things. And that as you're getting that active feedback from users, it's not just existing with you, it's also being shared openly with your partner so that they can help problem solve as well as provide responses to some of those inquiries.
Yeah. It's been a lot of fun playing in that sandbox, that's for sure, Patrick. Carl, for state leaders, as we start to wrap up here, for state leaders who might be on this call or listening later, who are considering funding projects like the one Patrick is leading, what's your advice on supporting technology-led innovations?
My advice is to be open to it and to be willing to take some investment position in a project that is even at the stage of R&D and something that'll go forward. And I was talking to a designer the other day in terms of technology. We were also talking about AI and so forth. And most of what we do and can do involves technology. So even if you are an illustrator, your set of pencils are technology that allow you to do something. And I think for our sector, technology isn't, just the answer to some unknown question. It really is a tool to be applied to specific things that you're looking at. So in the case of this project with the Pittsburgh Arts Council, you're looking at a need, but the problem was capacity, bandwidth, and getting all these things entered, whether it's for trend data on organizational health or calendars or mapping where assets and things are happening. So I think we need to understand the power of technology to take bigger and more information, but to put it into a way that is reasonable to get, accessible, and actually can inform decisions. So that's part of it. That's kind of the back office part of it. In terms of technology for us going forward, it's also being rapidly adopted in ways that our people are thinking about live performance, immersive exhibitions, digital content, interacting with audience, storytelling, iterating, being basically able to not just produce more, but produce better through iteration and things, processes like storytelling or storyboarding. So this is all to say, I don't think we should shy away from seeing how these tools can be applied in the right way and in the right places. But I think, we talked about having to do more with less. Sadly, I think that's a pressure on all of us in all of our sectors. But if we can use technology to make what we do more impactful and more give us greater ability to produce and reach, I think that's a future we can't deny, and we shouldn't. While we're in the sandbox, we shouldn't put our head in the sand. We should have our head up and enjoy being in the sandbox.
Yeah, well said. Carl and Patrick, thank you so much for joining today. I'm going to close us out here in just a minute, but any final thoughts from either of you? Parting words of wisdom?
I think that, I would encourage every arts council to really think about the ways that they are utilizing technology in a responsible manner to serve as an information hub, a storyteller, and an advocate for their field. I think it's going to be more and more important for us to be able to streamline getting information out to people as quickly as possible as societal pressures become more and more intense. And we're having internal conversations now about, we have all of these resources in PGH Art Hub, but also recognizing it's now in the present moment likely important to integrate just human and social services into it as well, recognizing that this is a resource for the folks that work within our field. And we need to make sure that we're supporting them at the human level. So really recognizing that this can be an incredibly powerful tool to make sure that the folks working within your ecosystem aren't just in survival mode, but truly have the information and connections to be able to navigate into a thriving mode. And just really appreciate both Carl and the PCI's support of this initiative, and Sharad, yours and EcoMap Technologies partnership on this initiative.
Yeah. My parting, I don't really have a lot of great wisdom this afternoon, so I'll keep it more simple. One, also extend my thanks to Patrick and the Greater Pittsburgh Arts Council for their jumping into this, taking a little bit of risk, playing in the sandbox with EcoMap. And just a statement that the services and infrastructure around a healthy creative sector really do require organizations like an arts council in their region or similar type organization that is looking at the ecosystem, that is providing services for those that are out there providing, doing, making, and creating. So this is just a quick pitch for those organizations that are working in the service area to the creative sector, and always to understand that that is a part of a healthy ecosystem.
Absolutely. Carl and Patrick, thank you again so much. I really enjoyed this conversation. And thanks for the folks who logged on live to hear it. If you're interested in learning more, you can find me or email me at sharad@ecomap.tech. And also feel free to check out our website, which is ecomap.tech as well. And with that, wishing both Carl and Patrick a wonderful weekend, and everyone else who's on the call as well. And we'll see you all next time. Thanks, guys.
Everybody.
Thanks.